Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to Carry On number 4. Hope you guys are having a good week and a good Tuesday. I know I've not been the most consistent with having these live streams, but the goal is to become more consistent. If you can hear me, if you can see me, just let me know in the comments so I know you guys are here. Great. I see some comments. Okay, great. I don't know if you guys remember, last time I forgot to hit the live button and spoke to myself for 20 minutes. So that was fun. Definitely not doing that this time around. So to get started, first of all, I wanted to quickly touch on this Rachel Zegler situation and then let you guys know about what the next video is going to be about. And then for the remaining of this live stream, I'm going to be answering some wonderful questions that you guys sent my way last week. And then at the end, we will be going through any super chats. So let's go. Okay, so the Rachel Zegler situation, I know it's been blowing up for the last couple of weeks and I haven't said anything about it. I was kind of astounded at how much these old comments that she made. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, you know, she's the new Snow White that Disney has cast in a live action remake of the original Snow White from 1937. And about 11 months ago, when they were promoting this movie and announcing it, Rachel made a bunch of comments sort of criticizing Snow White and making pretty immature comments about the original story. And it's made people pretty frustrated that Disney is stuck in this pattern of trying to make all these very feminist, woke statements through every project that they engage in. And when they're taking on and remaking these old stories, there's no respect for the original content, and that's pretty frustrating. And of course, any criticism of Rachel has been looked at as if we have a problem with her because of her diverse background. You know, she's, I think, 3/4 Polish and 1/4 Colombian, and so people are interpreting any criticism of her as having racist overtones. And, you know, that's always an easy answer that people who disagree with whatever one side is saying is to say, oh, it has to come from a place of racism. It couldn't possibly be legitimate criticism, right? So anyway, the point is that the criticism is actually very legitimate. And I'm currently working on and editing a video analyzing the situation about why exactly characters like Snow White and any female characters have become this battleground for feminist propaganda. So we will be talking about that. That video is going to come out in a week. So look out for that. And as part of that video, I've done a full analysis of what the original Snow White story actually means. And I've done a comparison with modern perspective on what a female character should be. And I've used an example from a popular TV show. Not popular, I mean, it's always going to be popular. It's such a mainstay, but it's from the 90s, Sex and the City. And I use the character of Samantha Jones as a comparison because I think she is the modern princess. So look out for that. Okay, so let's get started with the questions. Last week, I asked you all, what questions do you have for me? Because I wanted to have content here to talk to you guys about. And you always come up with great questions. I am honestly blown away by the stuff you guys throw my way. I absolutely love it. You guys make me just love doing this every day. It just revives me. So thank you for that. So question number 1 is from Guy Ramos 3733. And he asked, do you think cancel culture has lost its strength? If not, why? If so, what does it mean for the future? I think cancel culture hasn't really lost its strength. I think we're just a lot more desensitized to it. I think the first couple of times that people were actively canceled online, it was quite a shock to the system because we had never experienced something like that. This massive rage of a mob coming after one individual. If you guys remember, one of the girls who had sustained, you know, the early cancellation was this woman who was flying out to Africa, and she made a really poor joke about catching AIDS in Africa, but she said, "Oh, just kidding! I wouldn't catch AIDS. I'm white." and she made that joke on Twitter and turned off her phone, and she was on this long flight, and by the time she landed, she had been completely pilloried online. And she's one of those initial examples of what cancellations could do, because she received a lot of hatred. She got fired from her job. I mean, she got just completely piled on for this really foolish joke. So I think stuff like that still happens today, where someone will say something and then there'll be legitimate criticism that will get tossed at them, and then there'll be like unnecessary criticism, the type that is very angry. That happens as well. But then there are those people who just take it way too far. They'll send death threats. They'll send very aggressive, angry messages to people on social media. So I think that still exists. I think that is just the nature of human behavior, especially when you take it online. So by the way, I get awful messages in my DMs, right? I get great ones too. I mean, I get very nice, sweet ones, but then every once in a while I'll get death threats. I'll get angry messages. I think that's just a mainstay that's going to exist. And you wouldn't say these things out in public. Like, you would never go and say those kind of things. Like, a person would not shout those kind of things in public, generally speaking, because they know there would be repercussions. But that's the thing, there are not online repercussions for doing things like that. So I think the mob creation online is going to be a reality always. So what does it mean for the future is that I think one of the evolutions that we need to make as individuals is that how do we exist online without losing our humanity? Because that's a common problem that we're having. A lot of our sense of humanity comes from being connected with people in person. And when we lose that embodiment, and we're just like avatars of ourselves online, where there's no for example, I could be a really good person day to day when everybody's looking at me, but I could go online and create this no-face persona where no one knows it's me specifically, and I could go say the most hateful things. And I think that, and what it's really doing, like, if I go and do that, I'm really doing it because there's some need that I'm trying to meet. Like, there's like a dark beast within me that I'm trying to feed or let out steam through by really saying all the things that I wouldn't say in my real life. So I think that's a real problem for everybody. I don't think it's for specific types of people. I think that comes up everywhere. And I feel it myself. Like, sometimes I'll get really terrible comments, like I was saying, and my immediate reaction will be to say something really mean back. And one of the rules I put for myself is, don't say something online that you wouldn't say face to face. If you would have qualms about saying it face to face, then don't say it online. And I think that's a good guideline on how to figure out how to handle oneself online. So until we sort through that, I think cancel culture is going to be a thing. It's just going to be which side is in charge. And right now, it's definitely the left running the conversation around our culture. So that's going to change. I don't think that's always going to be the case, but there will always be a mob online that's bullying a majority of the people. I think that's going to be the case for a long time. Okay, question number 2. This is from Mohammed Dilman, 8195. As someone outside America, I feel like the country is in such a politically unstable state, and how you feel about it, especially all the political agendas are influencing TV and filming contents. So yeah, we have never been this as divided as we are today. And a lot of the content, TV shows are very much propagandist and tilted very much towards pushing woke ideology, feminist ideology. And the thing is, propaganda is not very effective. People have to already want to believe what you're trying to convince them of to be convinced by propaganda. And so the fall of TV, of basic television, of a lot of Hollywood is a result of them trying to convince a majority of the population something that they don't want to be convinced of. And I think right now we are in this position where we are very divided. That can only change through a proper unifying vision, and that has to come from the top. We have to, I think we're in this place where there's literally, well, I say literally, but I don't mean literally. There is this massive power vacuum. No, I should say leadership vacuum in positions of power. So best example is our president. Our president is literally, unconscious. He is not here. He is not our president. He is a puppet that's being controlled by a lot of other people. He is, it's a really sad situation because he's so old and his brain has deteriorated. And it's really sad. It is elder abuse, but that's where we're at. And I think it's like what happens in a company if the CEO is practically absent, right? Like we all need a hierarchy to look up to for guidance. And we live in, that's just how we react as people. And we don't have that. We don't have proper leadership at the top, neither politically nor socially. We're just very, very disjointed. And everybody's sort of breaking off into small factions. And, well, this is my version of being an American, and this is your version of being an American. And there's no unifying what does it mean to be an American. I think that'll happen. It'll change. It'll happen in the future. These things are always cyclical. So I just think we're in a bad state. Okay, next question. Brandon the Awesome. He asks, do you think this will all get better? Do you think that one day things will go back to normal? Yeah, I think that's I should have lumped it in with the previous question. I do think so. I think it will get better when we have a proper leader that comes out that unifies us politically and spiritually. I think the hardest thing right now is that we are such a global world. That didn't used to be the case, right? Every country had its own borders, had its own culture, had its own religion. Now we are traveling from between countries so much that there's this more like push for it to think globally, which is very hard to do. How do you unify, billions of people? It's not possible to do that. So what used to happen is that you had an identity by country, and that meant that if you were part of one country, you knew what language everyone spoke. Everyone spoke, most of the time the same language, and you all had a similar culture that you unified under, and you all had a similar religion that you unified under. And the reason those things are actually really important is because it's like a guideline on how to connect with the other person. Like if I'm about to speak to someone that I've never spoken to ever before, I know that they're going to have similar values to me, and I know that they're going to speak my language. I know how to talk to them, how to connect with them, because it's one of those things. So maybe I'm not doing the best job of explaining this, but like when I was 10 years old, I moved from India to America, and the hardest part, I already spoke the language. That part was easy. But the hardest part was learning the culture. The American culture was very different from Indian culture. And I often hear people talk about this. Oh, America doesn't have a culture. Yes, it does. Every place has a culture. It's just not, certain type of clothes or like colorful festivals. That's not what culture is. Culture is a shorthand about how people relate to each other. How do they live in similar vicinity? So like, I'll give you a small example of, in India, it's perfectly acceptable for people to go over to each other's homes unannounced. So that used to happen to me all the time. My friends would come over to my house without telling me, and I would go over to their house without telling them. That was dropping in on neighbors was perfectly acceptable. In America, you do that, that's considered really rude. That is culture. How far you stand from each other. If you line up, if you're standing in a queue in America, you can see that the distance between each person is very different from a queue in India or queue in Korea. that's the thing. These little things are what make up culture. It's a shorthand. And so because we are a global society, we're melting so many different people from so many different places, and we're losing sight of what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be an Indian? Like these things. I mean, India is fine because India is not having this massive influx of people from other cultures coming there, but America is, the United Kingdom is, there are Western societies that actually always go through that. And that's why immigration as a policy is really important, is that you want to keep that flow happening slowly, so that people have time to assimilate, so that they don't just overtake the culture. That if you have 50% of the population is now made up of suddenly a totally different culture, then they're going to take over, they're going to disrupt the current culture. Anyway, I can talk about that a little bit more. I don't want to bore you guys with that, but it's something I think about a lot. So anyway, the point is, we're in a weird time because we're trying to figure out a global way of thinking, when really we need more of a local identity, which is really missing. Okay, next question is by Phoebe. What should a good female character look like, be in a story? Are there any female role models you look up to that represent healthy femininity? Yes, there are a couple, and I think this is something I've talked about a lot, so I won't stray on this point too much, which is that right now a lot of representation of women is to just make them men, and I don't agree with that at all. Excuse me. So my perception of it is that healthy feminine representation should be inherently feminine and have feminine qualities. And what are feminine qualities that I admire, that I think we should all admire, is, our ability for emotional resonance, our ability for to really sacrifice in the name of greater good. That's a very female idea. So if you look at stories with even male heroes, you'll see that the moral backbone, moral source of guidance comes from the woman who the man looks to for guidance, right? We'll see this, like a good example of this is, Lord of the Rings is so much about Aragorn coming to the throne, but there's so much of his thought is really guided by Arwen about what's the right thing to do. And I think I've mentioned this to you all before. That this line that I've heard, that men have the means and women, men have the means, but women provide the meaning. And right now they're trying to make it seem like women have the means and the meaning, that they can, punch a guy as well as understand the moral nuances of any situation. But the reality is that the reason women are so morally nuanced, why we're willing to be so empathetic, thoughtful, kind, is because we are physically weaker than men. And it's that perception of weakness that makes us really aware of the situation. And that's one of the great traits of femininity is intuition. Is that women can sense danger far more than men can. And that's an important trait, because we can get killed a lot more easily than men can. We can be attacked a lot more easily. So we have to be more intuitive in order to survive. There's a great thinker on all of this, and her name is Louise Perry. You can find a lot of podcasts that she's done. She's done one with Chris Williamson. She's been on the Trigonometry podcast. She's just so intelligent in the way she explains the importance of female strengths. So, and then coming back to this question, is there a character that I really respect? And I would say probably from recent movies, one of the few characters that represents true female strength is from A Quiet Place. And I don't think we know her name, because nobody ever talks in the movie. The movie is mostly silent. But I don't think her character actually has a name. But she's played by Emily Blunt. And what's beautiful about that movie, if you haven't seen it, it's it's this post-apocalyptic situation where you can't make any sound because you'll get attacked by this alien invasion that has taken place, and these creatures they can hear very, very easily, so you can't make any sound because then they're on you. You're done. So the movie is very frightening and very well done. It's made by John Krasinski, Emily Blunt's husband. And in the movie, they have 2 kids. They're a married couple, and they have 2 kids. And despite this post-apocalyptic situation where a big chunk of the population has been decimated, she still chooses to get pregnant so that she can have a 3rd child. And she talks to her husband, and she says, "Ooh, I've got goosebumps thinking about this story." She says to him that you have to protect the kids. And she says, they're whispering, obviously. She's like, you have to protect the kids. If we don't protect the kids, what is all this for? And, this is right before she's about to go into labor. And that idea that despite this terrible apocalyptic situation that they're in, she chooses to undergo the pain and difficulty of labor, because to her, it's more important that the children survive, because what else are we here for? And I think that is the most important female trait, is the willingness for self-sacrifice for the sake of the future. But it's not really a part of us that modern feminists appreciate. They actually don't like that. They feel like women shouldn't have to self-sacrifice. They feel like men don't self-sacrifice. And I think that's completely wrong. I think men and women both sacrifice for the sake of children. And that is a very important thing. I think that is the best overarching explanation of what it means to have kids, is to sacrifice yourself for the sake of the future, that they now become more important than you. And both the men and women have to be willing to accept that. And I think women accept it more willingly, and men need women to remind them of that. Yeah. And someone just said, women and children first, which is what a lot of societies have always favored, right? That whatever happens, the men are more disposable of than women and children. And every stable society is rooted in that idea. Okay, sorry for all the honking going on. Yeah, it's a daily occurrence. Okay, next question is by Beck's Video Productions. How do we balance being able to use jokes and sarcasm on sensitive subjects in the name of free speech with being respectful? When is it okay to say, look, if you feel offended, just leave, ignore, or accept it? I think this is a hard question. This is a hard question to answer because it's such a negotiation. I think you have to look at the why. So if you're making a joke that's particularly rancorous and is going to, anger a lot of people, let's say you're a comedian and that's your role, and I think that's perfectly acceptable, because people can choose whether or not to listen to your show and participate in your services. But let's say this is more on a personal level. And if you're making a joke to be hurtful, then I think the other person can have a reasonable say in protesting your joke or your comments, and then you can't just say, oh, deal with it, you're being sensitive, you're being overly sensitive. And if you make, let's say you make a comment that isn't aimed to make someone hurt, but instead your intent is just to make a joke or do something light, and then the person is trying to stop you from making that comment or has a protest to your comment because they're trying to control you, then you're in the right. So it's such a balance, because you have to look at the intent behind your comment and the other person's protest. And if both of you intend nothing but goodwill, then it's likely that neither of you will have problems with each other's comments. But if there is something a little more hurtful there, then I think it's reasonable to have a protest. But again, this is a hard question to give a blanket answer to, because you have to really dig in to understand. And that's why I really like this scene from Interstellar where Cooper is trying to decide whether or not he should leave, go on this mission that he's been granted access to. And his father-in-law says to him, what matters is not the action, but the why of it. Your motivations behind why you're doing something are far more important than what you're doing. And I completely agree with that. So if you are saying something rude, it's less about the rude comment and why versus the why. Hope that helps. Okay, this is now the last question, and then we'll go on to any questions you guys have. But this is a very complicated question, and I'm very excited to answer it. So my answer will be a little long on this one. Petery6432 says, what are your overall thoughts regarding traditional religion, especially in context of wokeness, i.e., are you personally religious, irreligious, but generally okay with it, antitheistic, there you go, or do you think wokeness, wait, there's a longer question to it. Do you think wokeness is a resultant factor of irreligious people needing to satisfy their religious urges in some form, or is it something else? Okay, long question, but I'm going to break it down in parts because I think it's a really good one. To answer the first part is that if you had asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said I am not very religious, and I would have said I'm actually pretty anti-organized religion. But in more recent years, one thing has really changed my mind. For one thing, I still, regardless of anything, until the day I die, I will think of myself as a Hindu. I am a Hindu, and that just means you're born into this religion. And Hinduism is very rare. It's very different from other religions because you can't convert to Hinduism. You're either born into it or you're not, but you can also practice it. No one's going to stop you from practicing it. So it's not in the traditional sense of it's not a conquering religion looking for additional converts. It's not like that. So people who are born outside of the faith tend to find it more out of personal desire rather than being convinced by anybody else. And I think that's a great facet of Hinduism. It's not a forceful religion. But my problem with Hinduism in the way that it's practiced today is that it's very much oriented towards task-based thinking. It's Diwali, which is one of our biggest festivals. And, the guidance from my elders have been, okay, on Diwali, you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and that's it. It's very much like tick all the boxes and you are done with Diwali. And I think this is the problem with a lot of religions right now, is that the reasons behind why you do certain things on certain days, the meaning behind it has long disappeared. People have stopped talking about why exactly you're doing the traditions that you're engaging in. And as I've grown older, I'm looking for that meaning. I want to understand why. Why is it on Diwali we do X, Y, and Z? So I've reached that position, and I have to thank Dr. Jordan Peterson for this, because a couple of years ago I came across his biblical series where he did an analysis. It's a lecture series on the book of Genesis, and before listening to that, I had no interest in Christianity. I just, it's not something that really was interesting to me. But what I liked is that analysis was not an emphasis of the metaphysical, but instead it was an analysis from a psychological perspective. And I love that idea, because that gave me a completely new perspective on the importance of religious texts, is that they're really all written in these story forms. And that is because that's how we internalize lessons, life's lessons, is through story. Like, a lecture is never going to be as popular as a story is. And it's because a story gives you lessons for life in a way that actually feel easier to internalize than hearing someone say, you need to do this, or this would be better. So I think stories offer that perspective on inspiring better action from us. And this happens, I notice this in my life all the time, is that, and maybe I'm sure other people think like this too, but a lot of my friends will quote movies as reasons for why. And I just did that right now. I talked about Interstellar and a lesson from that, right? So I think that's really the benefit of religious stories, is that they are tried and tested lessons from your ancestors that survive through time and space because they're so valuable. Now, not all of them are valuable, but a lot of them are valuable. And what's interesting about Christianity, because all of Western society is actually rooted in lessons from Christianity. We are very critical of Christianity now, and I think that's because we've kind of extracted out of the teachings of Christianity everything that's good, and then all that's left are just the bad ideas. So we criticize Christianity for all the bad ideas, but we forget that all the good ideas that are now just so second nature to us actually came from Christianity at a time that they were novel ideas. So the best example I can give for that is that when Christianity first came about and started to spread, the idea that you should not own slaves was considered illogical. Everybody had slaves. Every society has always had slaves. And many countries today have slaves. But at the time, that idea was unheard of, that every individual has intrinsic value. That idea is rooted out of Christianity. And that it's immoral to have slaves, that idea is rooted in Christianity. And now we just take it for granted, right? We look at it as like, yeah, of course you wouldn't own slaves. But I think we have the luxury of thinking that way today because that was an idea spread by Christianity. And that's true for monogamy as well. Monogamy is rooted in Christianity. The idea of marriage comes out of Christianity. So there are all these things that our society is built on. The value of an individual, that comes from Christianity. And then, so we've kind of emptied Christianity of all the good ideas and used them up, and then been like, okay, now you just have bad ideas. Like, how they treat homosexuals. That's a bad idea. We're not going to accept that. So I think that's the problem, is that we're rejecting like the baby with the bathwater, but forgetting that why those good ideas took hold in the first place. So does that mean I'm a Christian? No, you'll never hear me say I'm a Christian, or I'm a this, or I'm a that. I will always be a Hindu, but I do see the value of looking at biblical stories. Right now, I'm even listening to the seminar Jordan Peterson did on Exodus last couple weeks ago, I read Bhagavad Gita, which is an Indian religious text. The next thing I'm going to read is Ramayana, which is also another Indian religious text. So my goal is to look at all of these lessons from religion and see how to internalize it in my life to live a more meaningful life. I can keep talking about this, but I think this is a good place to stop on that. I'll probably do a separate podcast just talking about religion. So now let me see what questions you all have for me. Okay. All right. How do you script/edit your videos? Any tips? Yes, I do have tips. So first, I start off with an idea. I'll try to start off with some question that is plaguing me. So right now, the question that I had was, why is it that Snow White, if Snow White is such an irrelevant character today because she's so antiquated, why is it that we're still talking about her, years later? Why is it that, there's still attempts to retell her story in different ways? Is there any value to the original story? So that's one of the questions that I started off this newest video with. So I start off with the question, and then what I try to do is try to collect as much research on it as possible. So I'll watch different perspectives, or I'll go back and watch the original, in this case, I watched the original movie. I read the original Brothers Grimm story, and then I'll try to just collect as many pieces of information relating to that as possible and get it into my head. And then I'll start to see if there's a pattern forming, like an answer. So what is the question, and then what is the answer, and what are the various beats that I want to hit to get to my answer? So what I do, and I'll show you guys here, is that I use index cards to like write out each beat. And so I'll point out a particular piece of information that I want to cover in one small section. So I hope that makes sense. Like a beat in, like, you start from point A and you have to end at point Z. So what are all the points you need to hit to get to your conclusion? So I write those all out on index cards, and then I try to reorganize it. That how is the video going to flow the best if I move it around in a way that makes it that easiest to understand, but it's also going to flow really well. So once I land on that arrangement of the points, then I solidify it. I mark it up that, okay, this is the sequence. And then I try to start the next day with a fresh mind and start writing the video. So I write from top to bottom, and I follow along with the index cards. Like, okay, all right, we made this point. Now we move on to the next point. Then we move on to the next point. And then I'll try to write the first draft, step away from it for maybe an hour, go for a walk, something like that, and then come back, reread it. This time I read it out almost as if I'm about to record, and I read it out loud just to see how it sounds. How does it feel? And then I make the edits. I do one final read through, and there it is. That's the final video. So that's how I end up scripting it. Once it's scripted, it goes into, I go ahead and record it. All right, hope that helps. There was one question I'd seen in the beginning where someone asked, do you think the Snow White remake will be similar to the Barbie movie? No, I don't think so. I think it'll be similar in one way, which is that it won't have a love story. They seem pretty adamant about that, about not wanting it to be a love story, just like Barbie wasn't. I think the current mood of feminist movie making is that it needs to be only about self-love and not love for her man. And in case you're wondering why, I will be addressing this in the next video about why exactly love is considered toxic now. So look out for that. Okay, next question. Oh no, next is a member. Welcome, Ferry. And welcome to Beast. You guys are members now. Thank you. I'm going to show this comment, but I don't know what it means. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up with the comments. Could you please make some videos about narcissistic personality? I have made a lot of videos about this. Honestly, have I think it's like a 15 video series on narcissistic personalities. They all talk specifically about Meghan Markle. I have not made a general, not just a general video, like what is a narcissistic personality disorder. I've always done it using Meghan Markle as an example. So I think I've genuinely covered that ad nauseum, where I don't think I have anything else to add. I've completely stopped making videos about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry now. The only video I think I will make is when they get divorced. So I'm saving my next video for that. I don't know when that'll happen. Maybe that'll happen in the next 5 years, who knows? But there are particular aspects of leaving narcissistic personality, relationships with narcissistic personality disorder people that I will cover at that time. Just because I think that understanding an NPD is a lot easier when you have a true example versus a hypothetical one. So that's why I use her as an example. Okay, here's an so if you have a question for me specifically about NPDs, I'm happy to answer. So feel free to pop it in the chat. Here's another question. Have you ever hesitated in starting a channel? Have you ever revisited a video you've made and maybe changed your opinion about it? Thanks for your work. Thank you. I did hesitate a lot to make the channel. I knew I wanted to do it, but I was very nervous about doing it. So that's why I chose to not use my own name and just come up with a pseudonym. And I felt a lot more comfortable. I think in a few years I will share what my name is and operate more under that and versus baggage claim. But I think for now, for me to feel comfortable, it's felt easier to have that slight distance from my real life versus putting myself out there. I've mentioned this in the past that I'm actually very shy, and for a long time when I was in my last line of work, I used to work with startups and in the corporate world. I used to be very nervous about even speaking up in meetings. So for me, one-to-one connection feels very easy, but speaking in front of a group of people feels very difficult. I've gotten better with this channel because there's no one physically here looking at me while I'm talking. But if I were to, let's say, give a speech even now in front of a group of 15 people, my heart would be just going off. So I think it's just exposure, slow exposure is what I need to get more and more comfortable with this. As for, have I ever revisited a video and changed your opinion? It's going to sound bad, but no. But to be fair, I don't go and revisit my videos too much. And then I kind of forget about them. But also, I think if I were to think back, I'm like, I've made like 50 something videos, 55 or something videos. I think I know what points I've made for a lot of them. I can't think about why I would go back and change my mind about them. I'm always open to it though. I don't think there's like a specific reason why I haven't changed my mind. I think I've just overly criticized myself and thought everything out to death before I've published it. Like I never say something if I'm not sure about what I'm saying. So I go through, as part of my writing process, I go through the things people might say if they're in disagreement with me, I go through that in my head. Like people might say, well, why are you making this point? And why are you making that point? And I go through that in my head and try to button up my thoughts and like make sure that I can defend against the critics. But I'm always open to changing my mind. So question, maybe I'm a little biased, but do you think there's a correlation with today's cancel culture and narcissism and females having more influence and power in society? Yeah, this is, I mean, my answer is going to sound racist, sexist, but yes, I do think that. I think female narcissism looks very different from male narcissism. Female aggression looks very different from male aggression. I think we're trying to figure out, this is I've said this before, I think during the Chris Williamson podcast, but we know where men go too far, and we've been very clear about that, where we've all come to a proper agreement. Like we know what it means to be toxically masculine. We've said like men should never raise their hands on a woman. Men should never behave in certain ways. We're pretty good about that, but we don't have that figured out for women. Like what exactly are women not allowed to do? We are not in agreement of that at all. And I think that's because in the past, women have been subjugated by men. I don't think it's as bad as we seem to think it was. I don't think like women were like men's slaves or anything like that, especially not in the last 100 years. But we have this there's this like guilt that we've put on men that like, oh, only now women are getting to be women. So it's like the rise of womanhood. So it's impossible at this time to criticize women for anything. So I think we'll figure that out. We'll figure out with this, open dialogue about where exactly it is that women go too far. And I think the side of women that will identify as going too far is our manipulative side. We are far more manipulative than men are capable of being. Just like men are far more aggressive than women are capable of being, like physically aggressive. So, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with being challenged in our bad behavior. I know people will take that as sexism, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think men need boundaries, and so do women. So we'll sort through that in the future. So here's another question. Hi, Ms. Claim. Is self-respect something that should have to be earned, or is it something that all people should feel irrespective of their actions? Great question. I don't think it should be something that all people should feel. I think self-respect is something you have to earn for yourself. So, when we're teenagers, we have low self-esteem because we haven't done anything in this world. We haven't accomplished anything. We haven't proven our value in any way. And the self-esteem movement is very much, says, oh, you should love yourself no matter what. I disagree with that. Now, I'm not saying you should hate yourself, but there's a limit to it. You should not criticize yourself into oblivion. You should never do that. And you should not praise yourself into oblivion. You should never do that. I think you have to find a good balance of saying, okay, can I have a conversation with myself where I can point out what's good about me as well as what's bad about me or wrong about me without me falling apart. And there's a quote, I think it's a Nietzsche quote or a Carl Jung quote, I forget, but that the measure of a man is by how much truth he can withstand. And I think that idea really pertains to also like, can you accept truth that you need to give yourself? Because a lot of people lie to themselves. A lot of people say, well, I'm great, or, my life is bad only because of X, Y, and Z, because of external reasons. But they can't see what their failings really are. And being able to have those honest conversations with yourself is really important. And I think that's what helps increase self-respect, is that, can you stand your own truth? And so I think self-respect really just only increases once you start to accomplish things. You can trust yourself, what you can withstand, when you make good decisions, when you show up for your friends, for your family, when you show up for the people around you, for your community. Those kind of things help increase self-respect. And that's why I think your 20s are very different from your 30s. The 30s are when people start to earn their own self-respect and stop trying to be something that they don't want to be. Because a lot of your time in your 20s is spent being insecure and trying to prove things to other people versus just letting yourself be, so to speak, and saying, okay, here are things I can do, and I can do them well. And here are things I can't, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that's a justification for me doing bad things, but it's okay for me to recognize that I'm not good at certain things. And that sort of honesty and balance is what helps you build your sense of self-respect. Okay. Here's Blackface Trudeau. That's funny. I think your last super chat was to say, leave Meghan Markle alone. And I thought maybe you were being serious, and I was going to say, well, I kind of have, but anyway, last super chat, clearly a joke. Serious question though, why do you think romance is fading from TV shows, movies, and even games? I think it has to do with a very postmodernistic perspective on love. The feeling is that to be in a relationship, you have to give up your power. And why do postmodernists think that? Because they look at all of the world from the perspective of power. And so for a woman to accept that she is going to be with a man and have a prosperous relationship with him means that she has to sacrifice some parts about her. So that's what I had to do, right? I had been single for a very long time before I met my husband, and I had to give up a lot of my sense of independent womanhood in order to be in this relationship, because you can't have a relationship where you don't need anybody and you say, I'm going to do everything myself, I'm an independent woman. You can't have a good relationship like that. You have to let the other person be there for you. You have to let your guard down. You have to be there for the other person. That means the other person is making sacrifices for you. You're making sacrifices for the other person, because it's very easy to negotiate with yourself. It's very hard to account for someone else and say they also have needs. And sometimes you have to set aside your needs for their needs. And that's what it means to be in love. But feminists don't like that. They think it's giving over too much power. So of course they are discouraging it, and that is playing out in front of us in all of these movies. And it's a very flawed perspective, terribly flawed, and it won't last long. But that's why people don't like modern movies, because it's devoid of any humanity. I mean, if you look at every movie that is successful, like, a movie that can last through time, right, through years and years, and the reason that those stories are so everlasting is because they have humanity at the root of it. They have love at the root of it, whether it's friendship or usually, but like really usually they have romance, right? Titanic could have just been about the ship, but it wasn't. Why did they put a romance in the middle of it? Because that's what draws us in, is that there's a romance that's at stake. There are two people who love each other that are trying to also survive, a terrible ex and a sinking, and they don't. Even with Lord of the Rings, there's so much reference back to Arwen. Why is that? It's because they're those kind of moments that give a story the heart, because that's what you're fighting for. You're fighting against evil to create more love. But they don't understand that point. That's why everything's about power. Oh, women should be in roles of leadership. That's what they should be aiming for. So that's why they're doing it. Here's an interesting question. Steph Hobbs says, thank you for your videos. If you could tell Meghan Markle one thing, what would it be? It won't work. What you're trying to do is never going to work. Maybe that, but she will, of course, not hear me. Sometimes I think about what I would say to the NPD, the narcissistic personality disorder that I had dated years ago. And I think about what would I say to this person if, he was magically in front of me some random day. And I always say to myself, nothing, because he would never listen. He would never think that my opinion was valuable enough for him to even deign to listen to me, right? And it's interesting because I haven't spoken to that man for 6 years, 7 years, something like that. And he still tries to get me back on his shelf, because that's what a narcissist wants. A narcissist never wants you to leave their shelf. They want to be able to pick you up off that shelf and play with you whenever, and then put you back. That's what they want. They want you on the hook. So what that means, how that translates into every day, is that if he calls me, I always pick up. If he texts me, I always respond. That's what it would mean for me to be on his shelf. And I'm not, because I don't want anything to do with him. I have him, blocked everywhere. And he still finds a new way to contact me. So even though I haven't responded to the several attempts he's made to reach out to me, he still tries to reach out. And that's how you can tell that you're dealing with a narcissist, because a regular person would say, she wants nothing to do with me. Why am I trying to reach out to her? A regular person would get angry with me. It's like, forget her. I've been trying to reach out to her, and she won't even give me the basic, she doesn't even have the basic human decency to respond to me. So a regular person would just stop, right? But he doesn't. And he's never angry. So he never sends me an angry message saying, how come you haven't responded? It's never that. It's always, some low level, low effort hello, some version of that. It's always like the lowest effort version of that. Or it'll be very intimate. It'll be like, hi, I've been thinking about you, miss you. Really? Someone hasn't talked to you for 6 years and not responded to your messages, and you tell them you miss them? It's such a narcissistic thing to do. And the reason they're doing that, the reason he's doing that, is because, first of all, the narrative he has in his head is that he's the bigger person. That I'm so funny. It's really funny, because his perspective is that he is God and I am one of his flock, and I have strayed from the paddock, and that he'll always have love for me because I'm one of his creations. So why would he have anything but love for me? Even when I act out and run away and all of that, I can never really get away from him. So that's why he's never angry. He's always sending me, loving messages, because that's what he wants to believe. He wants to believe that he's the bigger person. And that's how he wants me to think. He wants me to think like, oh, wow, look how he's like godlike and saint-like. And here I am acting like such a, impetuous child or throwing a tantrum. That's how he wants me to feel. So I'm listing all this out for you, not because it's, it's terribly important in this situation. I'm telling you all this in case you guys are experiencing something like this, and you're not sure, in case you're not sure why someone's doing that to you. a norm, and I'd noticed the same pattern with Amber Heard after the Johnny Depp trial. And her first interview. And if you haven't watched that video of mine on that, please do. It's where she's sitting down with Savannah Guthrie right after the interview, right after the trial, and she says, "I still love him. I'll always love him." And that's where she really shows her hand that she's a narcissist, because that's how narcissists behave publicly when talking about the person that they want back on their shelf. They'll say, "Oh, I always love him. I'll always love him." And it's a method of maintaining control on the original person. It's a way of saying, you'll never get away from my grasps, right? It's very sneaky. It's very sneaky. So what's the best way, if you're curious, what's the best way to deal with it? Silence. Don't say anything. Don't say anything. Just silence. And that's what narcissists hate. They don't know what to make of that. So they feel like their whole idea is, love me or hate me. And they're totally okay with you hating them, by the way. They love it because they want to feel like they have control over you. They want to feel like they can manipulate any kind of emotion out of you. So hate is not a problem for them. So it's love me or hate me, but don't you dare forget me or ignore me. So that's where it comes from. So, here's another question. Luke Shannon. Hey, Luke. Do you think a lot of these opinions and ideologies are being inflated in terms of acceptance by a small percentage of the population on platforms that use controversy to drive revenue? Yes, and I think it's really that these ideologies are being used as subterfuge by these massive companies, right? That will say, well, they'll take the side of the loud woke minority and say, look, we're on your side. We agree with whatever you agree with. And it's very low-hanging fruit. They don't have to do a lot of work to show support to those people. And that way they distract from all the ways that they're actually very immoral, right? Like, okay, we make fun of woke people a lot, but like there are a lot of things that woke people are arguing for that is reasonable, which is things like tolerance and equity and fairness and all these things. Like we might disagree on how they argue for how it's being implemented, but the ideas around it of like, oh, men and women should be treated equally and we shouldn't have a bigoted society. Like we agree with that. That is perfectly reasonable. Again, it just comes down to the implementation that I have a problem with. But, there are companies, these massive conglomerates are then literally engaging in slave labor or unsafe business practices where their employees at the bottom of the supply chain are extremely mistreated. And here they are partnering with these woke ideologists as a way of hiding, distracting from that, right? So that's one of the reasons why woke ideology has taken such fast hold, is because these massive companies have shaken hands with them so that they can take the heat off of, all the wrongdoings that they engage in the back end. And someone just said, equality of opportunity is greater than equality of outcome. Yes, absolutely. You cannot control outcome without implementing a tyranny. And it's important just to focus on trying to give people equality of opportunity. So I agree with that completely. Okay, we're coming up on an hour. So I think that's good because I can also kind of hear myself starting to run out of steam. And I do want to make sure I get back to the editing so I get you guys this video for next week, which I'm very excited for you to see. But wait, there's an important question here. Thoughts on Vivek Ramaswamy? I like him. He's offering a proper vision for the future, and I like that. So if things go to plan, I will be voting for him. But it's not me trying to push anything on you guys. You know, I'm never going to be the type to be like, I endorse this guy. But I'm just telling you, I like his vision. All right. Thank you all for joining. I always love doing this with you guys. I will, okay, and Stevio just said, do more lives. They're great. Thank you. I will. I promise I will do that. I'm going to get better about it. So I'm going to make a contract with you guys right now. You will see me next Tuesday. That sounds, okay, wait. Yes. No, not next Tuesday. The Tuesday after that, I will be doing a live. Yes. So you'll see me then. All right, all of you have a great, great day. Have a great week and look out for my video, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much for joining. Bye-bye.